In everyday living, our breath changes involuntarily with our many different emotions. The breath of joy contrasts with the breath of anger. The breath of fear contrasts with the breath of determination. The breath of freedom contrasts with the breath of oppression. And in singing, we want to express our many different emotions. However, our singing voice relies upon precisely managing our breath, a process we can consciously and mechanically learn. In this film, we will look at the basics of breath for singing, the structure and parts of our bodies that we need to train. But as we consciously learn to manage our breath for singing, we must also learn to connect with our emotions, our many different breaths, to combine them and create both skillful breathing for singing and natural expression of emotions. Breath is composed of two processes, inhalation and exhalation. The goal of inhalation is to bring air deep into the lungs so that a skillful management of exhalation can be accomplished for singing. We inhale new air with oxygen through the nose or mouth, throat, larynx, trachea, bronchial tubes, and into the lungs, where it is exchanged with old air heavy with carbon dioxide. We then exhale the old air through the same tubing. There are four essential parts of the body that, like members of a team, work together to create our breathing. The lungs, the diaphragm, the ribs, together with the intercostal muscles, and the abdominal muscles. These four body parts are our cast of characters for the rest of this film. We will look at each of them individually and show how they work together for optimal singing. Let's begin by looking at the lungs. Each of the two lungs is shaped something like a pear, with a large part of the pear at the bottom. For singing, air is inhaled deep into this large part of the lungs. The lungs are surrounded by the pleural sac, which connects the lungs to the surrounding attachments. The lungs are not muscles, but organs composed of soft, elastic tissue, and therefore they cannot expand by themselves. They must be expanded by their surrounding attachments, by the ribs, which fit snugly around the sides, front, and back, and expand the lungs outward, and by the diaphragm, which fits snugly against the bottom and expands the lungs downward. Together, expanding the lungs downward and outward in all directions, creating a partial vacuum in the lungs that causes air to flow in. When the surrounding attachments relax, the lung's natural elastic material shrinks back to its original size. By understanding this principle, that air flows in because of the partial vacuum, singers can avoid trying to suck in air to fill up, gasping or heaving their shoulders, and can instead simply expand their bodies downward and outward and allow the air to flow in easily. Now, let's look at the diaphragm, a large muscle that controls the movement at the bottom of the lungs. The shape of the diaphragm can be compared to the shape of a bowl, except it's like an upside-down bowl and tilted backward, and shaped more like an amoeba or a double dome, and has a tail at the back that attaches to the lumbar spine The tail is composed of two tendons called the pillars of the diaphragm. The diaphragm fans outward to attach to the ribs on the side, to the sternum, which is the breastbone in front, and, as we have said, to the spine in back. The diaphragm, located in the middle of the body, completely separates the thorax from the abdomen. By tilting the diaphragm backwards, we can see up into the high arched part of the bowl, where the central tendon is located. The central tendon is the top of the dome that stabilizes the up and down movement. If we slice the diaphragm through the middle, we can see how thin the diaphragm is. Its fibers extend outward from the central tendon to the rim. Like other muscles, when the diaphragm contracts, its fibers shorten, pulling downward on the central tendon, which causes the diaphragm to lower and flatten. Because the lungs are attached to the diaphragm, when the diaphragm contracts, it stretches the lungs, creating a partial vacuum in the lungs, which causes the air to flow in. Now let's look at how the ribs and intercostal muscles affect breathing. The movement of the sides, front, and back of the lungs is controlled by the movement of the ribs, which in turn are controlled by the intercostal muscles. The intercostal muscles are located between each of the ribs on both sides of the body. When the external intercostal muscles contract, they pull the ribs upward and outward. When the internal intercostal muscles contract, they pull the ribs downward and inward. The external intercostals are the outer layer of muscle, while the internal intercostals are the inner layer. The externals are more important than the internals in singing because after they contract to raise the ribs, they can simply relax to lower the ribs. Since the diaphragm presses against the lower ribs when it contracts, it also assists in expanding the rib cage. The cycle of breathing on the screen is the rate of one breath every 5 seconds, similar to the breathing of a person at rest. Since we normally breathe about 16 to 20 times per minute, we breathe in and out an amazing 25,000 times a day. The ribs cover a large portion of the surface of the lungs, which is why the movement of the ribs has such an effect on the lungs. Moving the ribs outward causes the lungs to expand, resulting in a partial vacuum and causing air to flow in. Moving the ribs inward compresses the air in the lungs, causing it to flow outward. In everyday breathing, this process is small and quick. But in singing, we need to expand the ribs much more, and then to keep them expanded as singing begins. The external intercostals must remain contracted so the ribs stay out, suspended in an open position, and only gradually relax toward the end of singing. If singers collapse the rib cage when they begin a phrase, then the lungs will lose air too quickly and there won't be enough control for singing. By keeping an open rib cage during singing, exhalation can be efficiently controlled by the diaphragm and abdominal muscles at the bottom of the lungs, as we will soon show you. But first, let us take a look at the structure of the abdominal muscles. The abdominals cover the front part of the body. At the bottom of the body, the abdominal muscles attach to the pubic arch of the pelvis, span across the entire abdomen to the top, where they attach to the ribs and to the sternum. The abdominal muscles exist in 4 separate layers. The first or outermost layer, the second, the third, and the fourth. The fourth, or innermost pair of muscles, is called the transverse abdominals, with fibers running from the side to the middle of the body. The fibers contract, shortening and thickening the muscle. The second layer is a pair of muscles called the rectus abdominis, which fits into a pocket of the innermost layer at the bottom. Its fibers run vertically from the pubic bone to the sternum. The rectus has 4 sections called bellies. These can contract simultaneously or independently. When they contract independently, we can see a rippling effect, like when a belly dancer moves a coin up and down her abdomen. The third layer is a pair of muscles called the internal obliques, whose fibers run upward from the side to the middle and contract in an oblique angle. The final, outermost layer is a pair of muscles called the external obliques, which are attached high on the ribs. The fibers run downward from the side to the center and also contract in an oblique angle. The 4 layers of muscles mean that the abdominal muscles can contract in several different directions: obliquely downward, obliquely upward, up and down, and across. Because singers can contract the abdominal muscles in a variety of ways, there are also a variety of breathing methods successfully used by singers. Looking at the body from a side view, we can easily see that the 4 abdominal muscles form the front and side walls of the abdomen. If we slice the abdominal muscles, we can see a cross-section of the front muscular wall. The contents of the abdomen, called the viscera, include the liver, the stomach, the large and